Now to India, and violence against the country's Christians has been on the rise ever since the Hindu Nationalist Party, the BJP, came to power in 2014. That's according to the rights group United Christian Forum. They say last year saw more than 800 attacks on Christians, a nearly sevenfold increase in a decade. Among the victims are members of India's Adivasi community, many of whom converted to Christianity decades ago. Much of the violence is concentrated in the Bastar region of the country's Chhattisgarh state. Natasha Suresh Raheja is an assistant professor of anthropology at Cornell University in New York State. Much of her work focuses on majority-minority relations. Welcome to DW. Indians, Christians, make up only a fraction of the population. Why is their resistance such an apparent thorn in the side of the overwhelming Hindu majority?
Thank you so much for having me here today. So I want to emphasize here that the relationship between Hindus and Christians in South Asia, and particularly in India, is long-standing. And the key words here are majority and minority. And my research points to how majority-minority politics in nation-states is a troubling dynamic and troubling equation. The minority, by definition, is a minor category. And my research shows how anti-minority violence is a feature of the nation state and not an aberration. So I want to kind of focus on how what we're seeing is a tension between a majority that's constructed and a minority that's constructed, not specifically Hindus and Christians.
OK, so that's just a fact of being human. If you have a massive majority and a much smaller minority, then that minority just suffers.
So I don't know if it's a fact of being human. We, as historians and anthropologists and social scientists, trace how the nation state is a form that is premised on minority and majority politics and what we call a politics of numbers. So how we also want to count people is contingent. We can decide to count people by religion, we can decide to count people by gender, we can decide to count people by caste, and these are hotly contested and debated categories. So by enumerating Christians as a minority in India or enumerating Hindus as a minority in Pakistan, which is where my research is also focused, we end up permanently ghettoizing a category and creating an inferiority complex and what some scholars have drawn our attention to as a kind of majoritarian complex. So majorities fear then becoming a minority, and there's an anxiety of incompletion. So what we're seeing with the Hindu majoritarian government in India right now is directed violence against a minority, and not only the Christian minority, but other minorities as well, which is very tragic.
See, when you talk about directed violence, it seems inconceivable that a majority of this size would have anything to fear from a minority of that size. Give our viewers a sort of sense of how intertwined Indian identities is with the Hindu religion.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So absolutely, this demographic panic is part of minority-majority politics, and demographic panic is manufactured. And as you noted, when we think about the relative numbers, Hindu so-called majority is not in decline, and yet there is a manufactured fear whereby Hindu majoritarian actors promote this idea that Hindus are under threat. And this is a template that we're seeing not just in India, but in South Asia and across the world. In terms of how Hindus and Indians are intertwined, I can answer that in two ways. One is, of course, Hinduism is a religion that is very prevalent in South Asia, and particularly in the regions that comprise India. And there are some features of Hinduism, for example, polytheism, iconography, idol worship. These are quite ubiquitous practices across India. And the second way I can address your question is that Indian is a national identity, and nation states have political membership, and they get to determine what it means to be an Indian citizen. And increasingly, under a Hindu nationalist government, political membership is becoming narrowly defined across religious lines.
Thank you so much for talking us through that. Natasha Suresh Raheja from Cornell University. Thank you so much.
Thank you.